just love this book so much. So yes, a new favorite, 5-star read, 10 out of 10, no notes from me. Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Ebony. Nice to see you again. It's been a minute. I just thought that I would do a very casual chit chat on what I've been reading, what I've been up to lately. So first off, it feels so weird for me to be back on camera, but I'm beyond excited to talk to you about the 10 books that I have read since the last time I posted, and then also a few that I'm currently reading. But before we get into that, I do have a big announcement. I got engaged. I will be planning a wedding and doing all of those things, but I always say that I just want to elope, so I don't know which way I'm going to swing. I'm like a pendulum. I don't know which way the momentum is going to take me, of like having a planned out like elaborate wedding or like something very minimal and low-key. That's kind of what I'm thinking about. Also, I'm still in school, taking classes, which is why I have like a lack of reading, because I've been reading for my courses and then also just like not having as much time to read recently. And I am applying to MFA programs this year, so I've just been in the throes of like getting my manuscript together, getting my personal statement together. It is application season right now. A lot of applications are due soon. So I plan to fill you in on that process a little more and what that's been like for me. But yeah, I'm so happy. How are you doing? Let me know in the comments. It's been a while since we've chatted, and let's just get straight into it. So I'm going to kind of do it in order, in chronological order of when I read the books. The first book that I finished since the last time we spoke is The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, and this is by Honorée Fanonne Jeffers. I loved this book. I love this book, and she's a thickie. I have big book fear, but this eased my fears. It actually made me want to read more larger works, because I just felt like the building of the characters and their relationships to one another was gorgeous. This is a historical fiction that centers Ailey Parker, and she is a young girl coming of age. We follow her from girlhood, like being a child, all the way into her young adult life. And as we're getting insight into her, it kind of parallels or mirrors past experiences that her ancestors went through. Through this, there is the works of W.E.B. Du Bois throughout, who is a prominent figure in American history. He worked very closely with Abraham Lincoln in freeing enslaved people during the Civil War, talks a lot about Reconstruction. So it's tracing the Black experience through America, first arriving to America, being enslaved here, and then how that story is a story of resilience and resistance, but it focuses on the women and what they've gone through. This was so good. I love the audiobook as well. This will be a book that I recommend to everyone. I think everyone needs to read this. And I just felt for so many of the characters, and I felt like they were my family members. I read this with Roisin, who is another booktuber. You should check out her channel. She has the Big Book Club, and yeah, I did a segment on that, which is posted. So if you want to hear my more in-depth analysis of this book and conversation with her, I'll leave that link below. But yes, love this. Please read it, and if you're like me, do not be afraid. This was so good. I actually want to reread it. I want to make it a point to reread this in my life. So of course I had to sneak in a poetry collection. So this is Black Under by Ashanti Anderson. I was invited to go to the Poetry Society of New York's Poetry Fest on Governor's Island, which was so fun. I had such a great time, bought a lot of poetry. I got to hear from very prominent poets like Ilya Kaminsky. Just so many new favorite poets were discovered, and I got this because Black Lawrence Press had a table there and the author was there. So this is signed. On the back It says this book is polyvocal and kaleidoscopic, searing with slick acrostics, incisive self-portraiture, wry 16-line sonnets, and ironic job descriptions. Seeking Black artists willing to draw blood and conclusions to carve a living from death and intergenerational trauma. Black trauma defies strict categorization, save for the fact that it is altogether excellent. Ashanti Anderson reminds me that, given the right pitch, this bubbled mouth ain't a sick, it's a cure. I love this poetry collection. My favorite poem was Self-Portrait as Overseer, and I'll just read you a few lines. Imagine a 10-year-old with a whip. In films, it's always a middle-aged man with a haggard mouth. I also lost teeth myself, a little snaggletooth falsetto swearer. Love that. I read another very popular buzzy book on Book Talk, and that is Margot's Got Money Troubles by Rufi Thorpe. This is about Margot, who is a young woman. She is in her first semester of college. She gets involved with the professor there at her community college. He's married, she gets pregnant, and she decides to keep his baby, although he's pressuring her not to. And so from there, it's just about this like rise and navigation of Margot as she begins to make like adult content for OF, and the people she encounters and just how she blows up on social media. But what I found more interesting than that was the complexities and navigation of the legal system as it pertains to like acknowledging sex work as work, and whether or not she could keep custody over her child because of that. I found that to be very intriguing. A lot of people love this book. I just thought it was fine. And the reason being is some of the scenes felt a little too, what's the word I'm looking for? I kind of want to say avant-garde. I thought this was fine. I still read it, enjoyed it, but is it a favorite? No. One book that is a favorite though, that I read over the summer, Outline by Rachel Cusk. I love this book. This is my favorite shelf right here in my library, and it sits front and center in my favorite shelf. This is a new favorite book of mine, and I have tried to read Cusk before. I tried to read Second Place, and I just couldn't get into it for some reason. This, however, I devoured, and I feel like it was because it's a perfect mix of literary fiction tropes that I like, that I love to see, and then also the fact that I read it in the summer. All Outline is by Rachel Cusk is an unnamed narrator. She's a woman. She is traveling to Greece, and it's about the people she encounters and the stories they tell her. And from that, she tries to create a portrait, or an outline, I should say, of this person, their desires, their wants, their needs, their fears, anxieties, shortcomings, successes. And in a sense, as a reader, and this is what I feel makes this novel very genius, is the fact that we know very little of our female narrator. And what we do know comes to us in little spurts of information. And I found myself trying to make my own outline and fill it in with the characteristics of this narrator. And I think a quote that perfectly captures the sentiment that Cusk is attempting. She found after the incident that she lacked what might be called a vocabulary, a native language of self. Words, as the phrase goes, failed her for the first time in her life. He was describing, in other words, what she herself was not. In everything he said about himself, she found in her own nature a corresponding negative. This anti-description, for want of a better way of putting it, had made something clear to her by a reverse kind of exposition. While he talked, she began to see herself as a shape, an outline, with all the detail filled in around it, while the shape itself remained blank. Yet this shape, even while its content remained unknown, gave her for the first time since the incident a sense of who she was now. Yeah, just gorgeous. I need to get the other 2 books in this trilogy to continue reading. So subtle, so kind of boring. Like, this isn't a book if you love plot, it's just character studies. And in a sense, you are once again trying to create an outline of the narrator. And it made me think of how I interact with people, what I decide to share with them, what I don't decide to share with them. And then on the opposite end, that exchange where that person too is contemplating and choosing what they want to share with me, and how we piece together a portrait of each other's lives. I just love this book so much. So yes, a new favorite, 5-star read, 10 out of 10, no notes from me. So I started reading poetry because it was August, and if you don't know, August is Seeley Challenge Month, and Nicole Seeley is a poet who really created this challenge to encourage people to either read a poetry collection every day, read a poem a day, just spend more time in poetry. And with that, I kind of dabbled into some poetry, not a lot. The first poetry collection I read was I Done Clicked My Heels 3 Times by Taylor Bois. I love this collection. It's broken down into sections, and it's kind of a return home. It is an homage to The Wizard of Oz, or The Wiz, which has a resurgence lately. If you've seen Wicked, let me know. I loved it. But Taylor Bois was really holding space for the extended metaphor in her poems. I felt like she is such a great poet, such a great writer when it comes to love poetry. And what I found interesting was really like the sense of place that she was comparing life to, or her situation to, for Chicago, and moving away and returning home, and what that experience is like. So a poem that I think really also captures her sense of setting in place is Southside 6, and I'll just read some snippets from it. The act of remembering, of making memory, rebuilds the city in my mind 2 states away. The Ohio River cutting simply across the state line, its surface an empty face to cough up the mind's desires. The Chicago skyline undulates into view like a vision, glitters like a firework, mushrooming out against the wine red of a scramming sky. If water is mirror, what does that make of me? I call a friend who lives back home, tell her I miss the heartbeat of Chicago, the way the skyscrapers seem to bend down to protect me. I skip a rock to pleat the water's calm, yet I still see you there. The river carries you downstream like a prayer. Check this out if you haven't yet. Poetry collection 2 that I read was Anodyne by Khadijah Queen. This poetry collection is escaping me for a few different reasons. I felt like this had very big brain energy, and at the time my brain was not doing what it needed to do to understand these poems, so I need to revisit this. But this poetry collection is also about like memory and motherhood and the self in the context of our current world, from the perspective of a Black woman poet. And an anodyne is just essentially a salve or healing ointment for a wound. I typically love poetry that uses the body as a metaphor for historical context, for the threat of cataclysm, for any of the things that were listed. But like I said, this was like harder for me to understand for some reason. Doesn't mean that I didn't find beautiful moments throughout this collection. I just don't think that I read it at the right time for me, and that's okay. I can always go back and return to it. Next we have Handful of Poems by Maciel Alfonso. I personally know Maciel, and she is a poet, performance artist, and this is her poetry collection. It was so good and I thoroughly enjoyed it as well. Definitely recommend. And this is a poetry collection that if you are especially new to poetry or you want to dabble into it, this is a good place to start. I might have to replace my SD card because it looks like I have 1 minute of filming time left. So just give me a second and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back. After I read a handful of poems, I read a very popular book yet again, and that was The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. This is a literary mystery that revolves around a summer camp in upstate New York. It takes place in August, so I felt like I read it at the right time. And within this, there are 2 mysteries that are happening. Both revolve around the siblings of the owners of the camp. So with that, this perspective does 2 things. It dilates back and forth between the present and the past. And it also shifts point of views from various characters. And I just thought that the writing was so well done, and the sense of like panic and disorientation of being in the woods was phenomenal. I'm very familiar with upstate New York, and I've driven up the Palisades. I know what it's like going in that area and just being surrounded by trees. And I love how this alluded to that sense of panic, of like losing your sense of direction in the woods and what you can do to survive. And this story does so many things. It takes that into account of what does it mean to survive physically in the woods, but like metaphorically in the forest, of like a woman navigating class, navigating, you know, an arranged marriage or forced marriage, just the depths that people will go to survive, especially if you have been victimized through like any of these societal or like elusive or abstract things, like your class position, like your gender. And that was explored so well, and that's what I loved about it too. But not only that, the mystery was really good. It kept me reading as well. I didn't really guess the twist, but the mystery resolves around Bear, who was the son of the camp owners, and he's kind of the heir. They're a very rich family of their entire estate, but something happens to him and he goes missing, and his murder was pinned on one person, and there was another person or another like serial killer who's on the loose during this time as well. So it was never really clear who committed the crime. Of course, that gets resolved at the end, but that was in the past, in the 70s. And then in the 90s, we have his older sister who goes missing as well, and kind of what happens and how her case gets solved, if it does or it doesn't. The God of the Woods was so well done. I loved it. I read it so fast. Gave it 4.5 stars. I've been very picky with my star ratings lately, and I'm just, in my mind, a 5-star book is like an all-time favorite, and that's what I gave The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. Like, I just know I will read that book over and over again. An outline. This one was like a 4.5. So yeah, good reading in the summer. I also read First Love by Lily Dansinger. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She is the author of Negative Space, and in First Love, she talks about female friendships. It was so good. I loved this essay collection. It's a mix of essays, memoir, and Lily's cousin was tragically unalived by someone, and she was Lily's first love, in a sense of they were very close. They didn't have siblings. They were going through very similar like familial relationships with their parents. And so Lily really felt a kinship and a love to her cousin. And so we kind of get insight into Lily's feelings surrounding that case and her cousin's unaliving. But then we also get insight into the other women and like other people in her life who have served as like anchors in friendship. And my favorite essay in here, I liked a lot of them, but my favorite one was Partner in Crime. And it talks about the film Heavenly Creatures, which I have not seen. And it's just about these two friends who become so enamored and obsessed with each other that they commit a crime in order to stay together. And she takes this film as a way to like analyze her own interpersonal relationships and what's healthy and what isn't. So good. A lot of references to like other pop culture moments, to social media, to the whole sad girl archetype and how that is detrimental to like mental health, obviously. But it was so good. Up next, I read another fantastic book, another very buzzy book, and that is Shred Sisters by Betsy Lerner. So there's a theme going on here, and it's reading about like sisterhood, friendships, and like the lengths you will go to love someone, even if they're hurting you, even if they're not in the best like condition themselves. So Shred Sisters is about two sisters. They are very, very different. One is more shy and like logical and analytical, and the other one moves purely off of like emotions, and these emotions are like unregulated. And she eventually is diagnosed with a mental health condition that isn't explicitly stated which one it is here, but it's kind of like how that mental health condition and how her sister unravels her family. This was so good. Yet again, Betsy Lerner is a new novelist, but she is the editor of Patti Smith's work, and I'm actually friends with Betsy Lerner, and I went to her book signing. I have 3 copies of Shred Sisters. I loved it. I got to meet her and Patti in the city, and it was so, so great. And I got a signed copy of Patti, one of Patti's poetry collections as well. And it was fantastic, and I loved it. And this novel deserves all of the buzz that it's been getting. You should for sure check it out if you haven't yet. So very quickly, because I've been yapping and my battery temperature is getting pretty high, I read You Can Make This Place Beautiful by Maggie Smith. This is a experimental memoir that is about Maggie Smith finding out that her husband was cheating on her, and kind of how she came to terms with that, their divorce, and the lasting impacts of that. It talks about motherhood. It talks about blowing up as a poet. It was very experimental and cool in the sense that the form was written both in like poetry and prose. One thing that I was not that keen on in this was the repetition within it. I felt like there were moments where I would have liked to have seen some more vulnerability from Maggie Smith, but instead we were viewed as the reader as like nosy and prying, which to me was a bit ironic, because like if you're writing a memoir, there's like this level of expectation of, yes, you can choose what to share with your readers because this is like being published to the world. But with the form, I think there's like a level of expectation that you are sharing some of these intimate moments, and I felt always like a fly on the wall, and I didn't really feel like I was in certain moments that I would have liked to be in, but just more so introspectively, what was she feeling? And then also, this is just a PSA to writers. Please I don't like the whole dear reader thing, especially when it's done multiple times. Like, I don't need to be addressed. You don't have to break the fourth wall. Like, I know I'm in your story and I know we're in conversation, but like, I don't have to be referenced throughout that. So yeah, that's just a personal pet peeve. I did love, however, how experimental this was and how hopeful it was. I finished that in November. And I also finished Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future by Jason Stanley. This was a nonfiction read, very short. I listened to the audiobook, but I will be buying a physical copy. Obviously, for obvious reasons, November would be a time where I wanted to educate myself on intersectionalism and governments and the roles that they play, and specifically our education, as someone who is in education, as someone who wants to continue to teach and be involved and engage with text critically. I find it alarming that what we are allowed to read is being controlled, or there is an attempt to control it, and just how that has roots in fascism. So that is what this was about. It looks, of course, at the United States, it looks at Israel, it looks at Nazi Germany, and draws so many parallels to the things that we are currently seeing. It was unsettling and infuriating, and I had to take breaks because it's a very real thing that is happening and might continue to happen. But I would recommend that you read this. It was written in a very accessible way. It didn't, you know, feel too over my head as someone who does not typically read from this genre. And I loved it. I definitely rated this, I think, like 4.5 stars as well. And it will be a text that I recommend to everyone to read. So please pick it up. If you want to listen to the audiobook, it's on Spotify, included in premium. Or if you want to buy the text, rent it out from your library, do whatever you need to do to get your hands on this and to be informed. And yeah, that's it. I've been chatting forever. My voice is going in and out. I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for being here and sticking with me. Let me know what other videos you want to see from me. I have some up my sleeve that are forthcoming. I will definitely be talking about my favorite books, but I'm just so happy to come back with a very chatty and long video. Have a beautiful day or week wherever you are. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye!